Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something really cool. We are unpacking the massive, overarching patterns of human history. We're zooming all the way out, taking a journey from our absolute origins as floating atoms in the primordial dish, right up to the world-shaking events of 1776. We're looking for the patterns, the rhythms, and the profound shifts that actually built the modern world we live in today. So let's just dive right into the big question, right? How in the world did we go from hunting and gathering to building these sprawling global empires? Because to really get a grip on our modern world, we've got to look at this continuous, almost rhythmic cycle of rise, expansion, collapse, and rebirth that completely defines the human story. How exactly did we trade our nomadic instincts for incredibly complex societies?
To keep us from getting major chronological whiplash today, we're breaking this explainer down into four main acts: the dawn of human civilization, the age of empires, faith, feudalism and conquest, and finally, the global renaissance. All right, let's hit the road. Okay, Act 1. The dawn of human civilization. This is where we shift from basic survival mode to building actual functioning societies. If you look at this timeline, you can see the massive, honestly kind of unfathomable leap from our deep biological origins all the way to roughly 4000 BCE. We find ourselves dropping into the incredibly fertile lands of Mesopotamia. Right there, sandwiched between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the citizens of Uruk literally changed what it meant to be human. They invented agriculture. Now, what's really fascinating here is the sheer physical toll this early civilization demanded. To crush cereal grains into flour, the people of Uruk were using these incredibly heavy stone hand mills. And sure, this allowed populations to absolutely boom. Uruk swelled to over 50,000 residents, which was huge. But there was a major physical catch. We basically traded our super athlete, hunter-gatherer physiques for intense, repetitive daily labor. Average human height actually shrank drastically. Men went from an average of about 5'9" down to 5'3". We literally became shorter, landlocked farmers. And, as these massive agricultural hubs kept growing, they absolutely demanded order. So jump to 1772 BCE. King Hammurabi of Babylon steps up and establishes the exact blueprint for the legal systems we still rely on today. He took 282 strict laws and etched them onto this massive 7-foot stone slab. But let's be clear, this was definitely not about equal human rights. He explicitly divided human value based on social class. Under Hammurabi's code, the legal value of a noble's broken bone was worth way more than a plebeian's, which was worth more than a slave's. Pretty harsh reality. Moving right along to Act 2, the age of empires, focusing on philosophy, power, and expansion. As you can see plotted out here, the ancient world was rapidly establishing these very distinct, highly organized, and fiercely competitive civilizations. We're talking everything from the sweeping dynasties in China to the mythic founding of Rome, all the way to the legendary battlefields of ancient Greece. To keep these massive new empires functioning, some seriously powerful philosophy has started to emerge. Take the Chinese Mandate of Heaven, for example. It operated on this continuous cyclical loop. Basically, the idea was that the heavens granted an emperor the absolute right to rule, but entirely based on his virtue. If a leader got greedy or corrupt, well, the heavens would send a sign. We're talking droughts, famines, devastating floods. This loss of divine blessing was the perfect explanation for how a previous regime could fall, and a totally new one could rightfully step up to take its place. Meanwhile, over in Greece, we see this incredible stark contrast in how human society could be structured. On one hand, you have Athens. They're experimenting with early democracy, sortition, and these massively complex assemblies where tens of thousands of everyday citizens actually had a voice. Then flip the coin, and you have Sparta, a society optimized entirely from the ground up for warfare. In Sparta, boys were literally taken from their families at a super young age for brutal physical conditioning. Their entire reason for existing as a society was total military dominance. But hey, not everyone was a fan of the whole Athenian experiment. The famous philosopher Plato, he actually totally rejected the chaos of Athenian democracy, where just random citizens were drafted into power. Instead, he argued for this concept of a philosopher king, a leader guided purely by logic, wisdom, and justice. It sounds like a beautiful idea, right? But historically, it was pretty dangerous because suddenly every ambitious conqueror, from Alexander the Great to Julius Caesar, well, they all genuinely believed they were that exact perfectly wise philosopher king. Before we wrap up the ancient empires, take a look at this very specific number, 26.2. So in 490 BCE, the vastly outnumbered Athenians somehow crushed the massive invading Persian army at the Battle of Marathon. An Athenian messenger named Phidippides was so pumped about the victory, he ran exactly 26.2 miles straight from the battlefield to Athens just to deliver the news. And boom, that is exactly where the modern marathon comes from.
All right, Act 3, Faith, Feudalism, and Conquest. This is where religion completely reshapes the global map. This particular era was entirely defined by some absolutely monumental religious shifts. You have the crucifixion of Jesus, and later, the profound revelations of Muhammad in Mecca, events that literally birthed global, world-changing religions. Add to that the brutal political vacuum left behind when the Western Roman Empire dramatically collapsed in 476 AD. That combination completely set the stage for centuries of devastating holy wars and massive territorial grabs. To really wrap your head around the sheer scale of fear operating in this chaotic era, check out this staggering number. The Eastern Roman Empire was so utterly terrified of Attila the Hun, a guy literally known as the Scourge of God, that they paid him an annual tribute of 2,100 pounds of solid gold. 2,100 pounds, just to keep him from smashing through the heavily fortified walls of Constantinople. So, with the mighty Roman legions gone, your average, everyday people were facing constant, terrifying threats from raiding Vikings, Huns, and local bandits. Out of pure survival necessity, they willingly traded their personal freedom for basic physical protection. And that trade-off birthed the strict feudal pyramid. Serfs were essentially locked to the dirt, forced to grow food. In return, they were protected by knights, who were managed by nobles and kings. And sitting at the very top of it all, the Pope, who was believed to be holding supreme divine authority over the lands.
Much later on, the Italian writer Niccolò Machiavelli perfectly captured the incredibly pragmatic and honestly brutal psychology that kept these massive feudal systems and empires intact. You have to ask, why did peasants just accept their lot in life? Well, as Machiavelli pointed out, fear maintained order when love simply couldn't. The peasants feared the invading violent hordes way more than they resented their own heavy taxes and complete lack of freedom.
Which brings us to our final act, Act 4, the Global Renaissance. We're talking rebirth, discovery, and revolution. The cycle really starts to accelerate here. We shift from the tragic, almost unfathomable devastation of the bubonic plague straight into massive, world-expanding global expeditions, like Leif Erikson hitting the Americas centuries before Columbus even set sail. And eventually, this momentum leads to the total toppling of old world powers and the fiery spark of modern democratic revolutions. In speaking of the plague, it wiped out an estimated 75 to 200 million people, just an incomprehensible loss of life. But history is full of these massive paradoxes, right? This catastrophic societal reset drastically shrinked the labor pool. Suddenly, everyday workers were incredibly scarce and therefore highly valuable. This completely flipped the script, practically forcing wealthy landowners to give the surviving farmers better rights, better wages, and a much larger share of the crops they were growing. Emerging from the shadow of the Dark Ages, this era of global rebirth saw just incredible flashes of human ingenuity popping up everywhere. Over in Africa, you had Mansa Musa leveraging his unfathomable gold wealth to build Timbuktu's massive university. In Italy, Leonardo da Vinci was taking his deep understanding of optical science and using it to paint the brilliantly elusive smile of the Mona Lisa. In England, the Magna Carta set an actual legal precedent that limited the arbitrary power of kings. And of course, the printing of Martin Luther's 95 Theses totally shattered the religious monopoly of the time. All of these separate events were laying the absolute concrete groundwork for the modern systems we use every single day. Finally, building on literally thousands of years of evolving law, intense philosophy, and brutal conflict, the cycle reaches a major peak in 1776. The American Declaration of Independence posed a bold, structural challenge to the age-old divine right of kings. In a way, it was the ideological descendant of the Magna Carta and that messy Athenian democracy, fundamentally rewriting King Hammurabi's ancient rules of class division. We've traveled all the way from the heavy stone handmills of Uruk, through the intense philosophical debates of Athens, across the bloody battlefields of empires, and right up to the printing presses of the Renaissance.
We've seen time and time again that history is definitely not just a straight line, it's a constant churning cycle. So, looking at these undeniable patterns of our past, I want to leave you with this one thought. As the wheel turns again today, what do you think comes next for us? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you next time.